Coal and the European Industrial Revolution. By Alan Fernihough and Kevin Hjortshøj. The Economic Journal. First published in November 2020. Abstract. To what extent did growth during the Industrial Revolution depend on coal? We answer the question using a panel of European city sizes between 1300 and 1900. Prior to 1750, there was no relationship between proximity to coalfields and growth. After 1750, cities closer to coalfields grew substantially faster than those further away. We instrument for coal proximity using proximity to Carboniferous-era rock strata. Introduction. Quote. We all know the basics of climate change. Human activity has greatly increased the atmospheric stock of greenhouse gases, the most important of which, by far, is carbon dioxide. The additional CO2 in the atmosphere is due primarily to the massive burning of fossil fuels that has accompanied the Industrial Revolution. End of quote. Weitzman, 2015, page 145. Climate change is refocusing attention on the origins of the fossil fuel economy. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, economies largely relied on wood and charcoal for their energy supplies. In contrast, as early as 1800, when the transition to steam was still in its infancy, English coal production yielded energy that would otherwise have required 11 million acres of woodland to produce, or more than one-third of England's land mass. By the 1820s, British coal production liberated an area as large as the entire island. To what extent did the transition to modern economic growth, which was so positive for long-run living standards, depend on the first of the fossil fuels that are now having such dangerous environmental consequences? Surprisingly, the extent to which growth during the Industrial Revolution depended on coal remains unclear. On the one hand, Wrigley regards the switch to coal as a necessary condition for the Industrial Revolution. On the other, Moker states that the Industrial Revolution did not absolutely need steam, nor was steam power absolutely dependent on coal. Disagreement on such a central issue in economic history is unsatisfactory, and can only be resolved with comprehensive quantitative evidence. In this paper we provide such evidence, using a database of European city sizes spanning the centuries from 1300 to 1900. Controlling for a host of other variables in a difference in differences framework, we ask whether cities located closer to coalfields grew faster than those further away. Prior to the middle of the 18th century they did not. However, from the late 18th century onwards there was a large growth bonus associated with proximity to coal. The effect was large. Our preferred specification suggests that cities located 49 kilometers from the nearest coalfield grew 21.1% faster after 1750 than cities located 85 kilometers further away. A reasonable objection to our argument is that the location of coalfields was endogenous to efforts to find them. We therefore instrument proximity to coalfields with proximity to rock strata from the Carboniferous era. We also look directly at the relationship between city growth and Carboniferous era rock strata. We control for spatial autocorrelation in a number of ways, estimate using various subsamples of the data, and use a large battery of control variables. Our results are robust across all specifications. The paper contributes to several literatures, most obviously the debate on the role of coal in the Industrial Revolution. Many classic works in economic history have argued for its importance. Dean 1965, Landis 1966, Brodel 1973, Pollard 1981, Matthias 1983, Wrigley 1988 and 2010, Pomeranz 2000, Allen 2009, and Kander et al. 2013, to name but a few. On the other side of the debate are authors such as Moker 1976, 1983, and 2009, McCloskey 1981 and 2010, and Clark and Jacks 2007. None of these works provides the kind of quantitative evidence presented here, but a more recent literature uses spatial data of one sort or another, as we do. Crafts and Mulatu 2006, Crafts and Wolf 2014, and Guberle 2014 conclude that coal mattered for the location of industry within late 19th century Britain and Germany. In contrast, Wolf 2007 finds no evidence that mineral endowments explain the location of fuel-intensive industries in interwar Poland. Klein and Crafts 2012 find little evidence that coal prices mattered for the location of fuel-intensive industries in the United States between 1880 and 1920, and Martinez-Galarraga 2012 argues that mineral endowments affected the location of mineral-intensive industries in Spain in 1913, but not in other years. Hanlon 2019 finds that by the late 19th century coal-related pollution was lowering city growth in the UK, while Mathies 2016 concludes that the impact of coal production on economic activity in the United States was initially positive but turned negative in the long run. These are all single-country studies. Ours covers almost the entire continent of Europe, and uses a data set spanning not only the Industrial Revolution but the centuries preceding it. The paper also speaks to the voluminous literature on the impact of natural resources on growth. Our results suggest that the relationship between resources and growth may vary over time, depending on the technological environment. And several papers have used European city sizes to study the determinants of long-run growth as we do here. Our results suggest that geology mattered more for city growth during some historical periods than others. The following section provides some historical background. Section 2 introduces our data while Section 3 derives the paper's results. Section 4 concludes. Section 1. Historical background. The use of coal did not begin with the Industrial Revolution. It was particularly widespread in Britain, where coal served a wide variety of purposes, both domestic, heating, and industrial, brickmaking, glass, ceramics, soap boiling, lime burning, forging, distilling, and brewing. What changed during the Industrial Revolution was primarily the use of coal in the iron and steel industry and the introduction of the steam engine. In 1709, Abraham Darby discovered how to smelt iron or using coke, a purified form of coal, rather than charcoal as a fuel, and the process started becoming widespread in Britain in the second half of the century. In the long run, this permitted a vast expansion of the industry. As Wrigley put it, iron has many physical properties that make it of the greatest value to man, but as long as the production of 10,000 tons of iron involved the felling of 100,000 acres of woodland, it was inevitable that it was used only where a few hundredweight or at most a few tons of iron would suffice for the task in hand. The switch to coal allowed humans to tap into a vast capital reserve of energy, stored sunlight, as Sapala calls it, which allowed them to break free of these constraints. 3 years later, in 1712, Thomas Newcomen developed his famous steam engine to pump water from mines. James Watt started working on an improved design in 1763, and by 1776 his steam engines were being used commercially. Steam then started to diffuse across the economy, slowly at first, and then more rapidly, so that eventually coal was being used to power not just the metallurgical industries, but textiles and many other sectors as well. Steam accounted for 35,000 out of the 170,000 horsepower installed in Britain in 1800, for 165,000 out of 350,000 in 1830, for 2,060,000 out of 2,300,000 in 1870, and for 9,659,000 out of 9,842,000 in 1907. The new coal-using technologies diffused with a lag to the rest of Europe. By the middle of the 19th century, both coke smelting and steam engines were being used in all the coal fields of northern France, Belgium and western Germany. Coal was bulky, heavy and costly to transport. It was also a fuel, whose weight vanished when it was used in the production process. There were thus substantial cost savings if coal was used close to where it was mined. According to Matthias, the logistics of energy inputs based upon coal, translated against available transport in a pre-railway age, precluded any major industrial complex in heavy industry from developing except where coal and/or were plentiful and adjacent to one another or to water carriage. Pollard remarks that the map of the British Industrial Revolution, it is well known, is simply the map of the coal fields. On the European continent, the coal fields of Belgium and northern France, and later on the Ruhr, became major centers of heavy industry, and other industrial regions only survived if they had reasonable access by water to a supply of good coal. Countries such as Italy that lacked domestic coal supplies were severely handicapped relative to their more fortunate counterparts. Not all economic historians agree that proximity to coal fields was essential for the development of industry. Moker argues that local supplies of coal in Belgium cannot explain why it industrialized, while the Netherlands did not. The Dutch could import coal by sea, and use both peat and wind. In a similar vein, he dismisses the argument that pre-famine Ireland did not industrialize because of a lack of suitable coal deposits. Ireland imported coal from Britain, with the result that its coal prices were between 100% and 150% higher. Fuel costs in the non-metallurgical industries were at most 4% of total costs. The lack of suitable local coal supplies thus increased Irish costs by at most 10% relative to British costs, and by less once substitution possibilities are taken into account. Lower Irish wages, he argues, should have more than compensated for this. If the introduction of new coal-using technologies meant that growth became more coal-dependent during the Industrial Revolution, then you would expect that coal would have started to matter for city growth at some point in the late 18th century or 19th century. Alternatively, given that coal was used for a variety of purposes prior to the 18th century, proximity to it may have mattered for city growth even earlier. And a third possibility is that it never really mattered at all. In the following section we outline the data that we will use to distinguish between these alternative hypotheses. Section 2. Data. Figure 1. Figure 2. Figure 3. Section 3. Empirical analysis. Figure 4. Figure 5. Table 1. Figure 6. Section 4. Conclusion. The Industrial Revolution was above all a technological phenomenon. However, the nature of the new technologies meant that access to coal became an important driver of regional economic development in the 19th century. We have found a clear relationship between proximity to coal and city growth after 1750, consistent with the accounts of Wrigley 2010 and many other traditional economic historians. Geology mattered for economic growth during this period. While innovation may have been the ultimate source of economic development, we cannot ignore the role of fossil fuels in fueling growth after the Industrial Revolution, or of geography in determining who experienced the growth over the course of the 19th century. End of article.